So good afternoon. In our continuing journey, I think this will be my 13th lecture. I really filled up my schedule. I'm trying to.
Okay.
And then there's feeding time, in the zoo. Yeah. So this topic is on stereotypes. Stereotyping and the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in. I believe that's the title. But again, sometimes titles are a little misleading, meaning there's a lot more to this than just stereotypes. It's really, I would have titled it, maybe subtitled it, The Art of Communication. Okay, so I'm going to start with that, because I think that's a vital element. As someone that's in communications, I speak, I write, I teach, and today with all the different channels and platforms on the line, social media, and the works, you really have to be everywhere. So you really, and there's a lot of competition, so you really have to be on top of your game. And how do you get through to people and communicate an effective message? In my case, I'm not selling a particular product or service, but rather really offering life skills that help people live more meaningful and purposeful lives, dealing with the challenges they have. As a matter of fact, most of the stuff on our site is free. But interestingly, free doesn't necessarily mean that necessarily you reach more people. It just means you're providing more free services. Obviously, people, just as an aside, we survive on donations, of course, and some things we do sell. But my point that I'm getting is the art of communication. So I have a lot to say on this topic for many reasons. Firstly, my career began actually not as a speaker, but as a listener. I know that sounds a little odd, right? But I actually began as a listener. What did I do? For years and years, from beginning, let's say, the mid-70s, 76, 77, long before many of you were even born, I was what was called in Hasidic lingo, a chayzer. A chayzer meant someone that repeated, that absorbed and repeated and reconstructed thoughts and ideas that were spoken by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So on Shabbat and holidays, there were no notes taken, of course, and no recorders were used. So how do we document the words? So there were a few people like myself who literally listened, think of it, walking tape recorders, like oral scribes. We listened for these hours of talks and we absorbed it. And then after Shabbat and the holiday, we would reconstruct it and then ultimately write it down and publish it for posterity. I wish I could talk a lot about that itself, that process. And I will just use it as a springboard for the discussion here. But it really was fascinating because, of course, the obvious question is, how do you remember hours and hours of talks? How do you remember? And we're not talking about general ideas in a 5-minute summary. We're talking about Farbrengens, these talks that went on for hours. There were breaks for song and saying l'chaim, but a total accumulative Farbrengen could be 4 hours of talks, 5 hours, even sometimes 7 hours. And just for the record, to just give you a scope of it, the Rebbe's pace of speaking, which is was that when you transcribed his words, an hour of talk yielded 20 pages, double-spaced, 8.5 by 11. So basically 4 hours of speaking, 80 pages. 7 hours, 140 pages. So that was what we were looking to shoot for. On Shabbat and holidays, we were that good, and I don't say it to toot my horn or anyone's horn, it's just that we were good, and we were able to reconstruct, let's say, a Farbrengen of 5 hours, which should yield 100 pages, maybe 97, 98 pages, without repetition, which is quite almost perfect.
Yiddish or English?
He spoke in Yiddish. No. We didn't each do one part. It's always the question people ask. If you can't remember 5 minutes, you can't remember 5 hours. You can't remember 5 hours, you can't remember 5 minutes. Remember, the mind does not run out of memory. You've never seen a brain suddenly say, out of memory, need a new hard drive. We have not yet reached that capacity. Let's put it that way.
Did the Rebbe edit what you wrote?
Yes, not all. He edited a number of talks, many of them, hundreds of them actually, but not the majority. And obviously we also had the opportunity to ask questions. But we never asked the question, we forgot what you said these 5 minutes, can you tell us? That was not, respectful to do, and we just didn't do it. And there were times we felt we were missing something. But there were a few, and we compared notes. And it's a fascinating topic, and as I said, I would focus on that alone, but I want to tell you some lessons I learned from that in the art of communication. Because I think you can't really be a great speaker or communicator if you're not a great listener. Now, many of us say, why? Why is that the case? Some people are good at giving and some people are good at receiving. It's not correct. Real communication is in a form of receiving. Even though I'm doing the speaking right now, but in a way, if I want to be successful, I need to reach you. I don't know who you are necessarily. So the only way I can really communicate to you in an effective way would be if I am able to sense your vibes and listen to your energy, so to speak. So even though you may not be speaking, you do pick up things. Sometimes from a smile, sometimes from just body language. And really, it's more than just sitting right now and speaking. It's also, when you do this for a while, you get the experience, you also understand the human condition. And therefore, you're able to empathize and relate to people, and they relate to you. Because if you hear a condescending speaker, arrogant speaker, so if they're selling you real estate tips or how to cook, you'll forgive them because you're getting information and it's valuable enough. But when you're talking about real matters of life and love and relationships and pain and dealing with the real issues of life, there has to be an empathy and a caring. There's an expression, I'm not sure who coined it, that says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's absolutely true. And just look at yourselves. When you listen to a speaker that's talking about life and matters that concern you, it's about care. And so care comes through listening. You don't care, because if I'm here just to tell you my great thoughts, then I'm not listening to you or your issues. I'm here just to share, pontificate about my brilliance. And that's not what true communication is. True communication is being able to have a rapport. Not just a question-answer period where people can ask. That goes without saying. But even when you're speaking, you're like, in a way, all speaking together. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well enough. What they say, the difference they say between a speech, a party, and a farbrengen is like this. A speech, one person speaks, nobody listens. A party, everybody's speaking and no one's listening. And a farbrengen, nobody's speaking, but everybody's listening. So you'll say, what do you mean? Someone's speaking. But the way it's spoken by real farbrengens, it's not the speaker is getting up there and giving you an oratory presentation. Talking about things that matter. Words from the heart enter the heart. That's a line from Rabbeinu Tam. It's a tremendous line. Words from the heart enter the heart. And words that come out of your mouth or from your brain often go into one ear and out the other. So, though we titled the stereotyping, and I'm going to address that, but I really believe it's really the art of communication. And communication is connection. It's a connection. I train speakers and I train teachers and sometimes I've talked to a bunch. I remember I always begin a workshop on speaking. I say, let's say you're going to be giving a talk, half-hour talk, and the people coming are coming once. You don't know if they'll ever return. What are your goals? What would you like to achieve in this hour? Or you're giving a class. What are your goals? And it's interesting. Very good speakers and all kinds of teachers come up with many things. They say inspiration. I want them to return. Everyone has a goal that you want to accomplish. Some say an insight that will change their life or something memorable. All good objectives, mind you. But it's not the main thing, in my opinion. And I always say this, and whenever I say it, every speaker and every teacher, whoever hears it, says absolutely right. What you want to do is cultivate trust between you and the listeners. If there's trust, you'll have everything else, because they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. They will return. But if there's no trust, and you say brilliant things, they find out. Like I said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Then there's trust. Now you can't earn trust in one talk, obviously, but they see that firstly you're not talking down to them. Secondly, you're not condescending and judgmental. Secondly, you are identifying with them. I'm like you and you're like me. We share similar issues. Even if one may have more knowledge than another, that doesn't mean we're not sharing the human journey and the human challenges of life. When someone listens and hears that, then they identify with you because you identified with them. And that is the real goal. If you can achieve that, I'm not saying you can always achieve it, but if you achieve that, you really have been successful. Because then that person will say, you know what, I'd like to hear more. I'd like to learn more, because you've opened up their heart. Because let's be honest, most people, you hear first time a speaker, you're always a little skeptical. Who is this? And then you start thinking the first few minutes, do I like what he's saying or not? Or what she's saying? And you make quick judgments, or sometimes you wait, give the person a little time. But we stereotype, as we'll discuss in a moment. So the key is to get beyond that. And to get beyond that really means that you're not trapped in your own way of looking at things, that the people listening to you really see that you care about the human condition, and you care about the listeners, and you also are not locked in one way. I'm going to tell you how it is. Much better to share and say, here's the dilemma, here's the problem, here, let me share with you some ideas or thoughts or experiences I've had. Often you hear someone speak about, God forbid, a tragedy they've gone through. Or, for that matter, success. What is it that touches us most? That they're being vulnerable. They're sharing a real experience. You can't argue with an experience. You can argue with a theory. You can argue with a philosophy, with ideology. But experience is an experience. Someone shares with you how, God forbid, they had a loss in their life and how they were devastated and how they grew from it and became stronger. You may not identify with them completely, but you cannot deny an experience. That's why a story has such power. You hear a story, people suddenly hear more silence in the room because a story resonates. Even more so a song. Yesterday I did Hasidic melodies, and you see when you start singing, everybody gets more relaxed. These type of language, that's really the language of the heart and the language of the soul as opposed to the language of the brain. But we're brainy people, and we use our minds, and perhaps we may even be brilliant, but it's not brilliance and the mind that touches people. That's useful as a tool to organize an idea, to present it in a cohesive way, and so on. But what changes and touches people is the heart. And if you can't speak from the heart, it's very, very difficult to really communicate. Again, I'm not talking about tips, how to play poker or how to sell real estate. There you just need someone who has experience and tells you the facts. If they have a heart, it would be nice, but it's not critical. Whereas real communication about anything that really matters requires that. This is my short introduction to the issue of stereotypes. And I've done a lot of study. I've experimented with myself, with others. So here's the dilemma. You're sitting in a room, let's say like this. So some of you I've already got to know even over this Pesach, previous Pesach. But still, how much do we know of each other? We live in different places. We're relatively strangers. Sometimes you're in a room with people you've never met before. And how do you suddenly empathize with them? You don't even know what they've gone through. If someone may be sitting there and has suffered a terrible loss and you have no clue. Someone else maybe have other stuff in life. Everyone has issues. And we're not mind readers. But empathy is not conditional on knowing what's happening in other people's lives. Empathy is sensitivity and vulnerability no matter what is happening. And the key thing, as I said, is getting out of your own head. If you can strip yourself from your previous misconceptions, preconceptions, I should say, including misconceptions, then you allow the audience or the listeners and the people you're communicating also to strip their preconceptions and listen to you. But if you can't expect the listener to do so. So to me, it was always a challenge. I go back now 30 years, maybe 40 years. I remember always thinking in terms of, I hear people sitting and listening to me or reading something I've written, and they have all kinds of preconceptions about all kinds of things. How am I going to counter that? How am I going to offer a new idea when they already have a perspective on that idea that they may feel they're very confident with? Or sometimes one-on-one. How often have you not had debates with people? You argue with people and the argument goes nowhere. You stick in your position, you're stuck in your position, they're stuck in their position. And sometimes it gets very frustrating. You think you can knock some sense in somebody's head. Sometimes you even want to strangle them. I don't mean that literally, obviously. But it gets so exasperating and so on. And sometimes you give up because simply, how long can you argue? What's really going on? What's going on is, it could be, takes two to tango, it could be both. But definitely one party there is stuck in a perception of something. They may be completely wrong, but they're completely confident that this is the truth. Now, if both people are that way, rest assured you're going nowhere. If one person is that way, it's also pretty almost impossible to break through that type of confidence or false confidence or assurance of someone just feels that I know about this. You know how many times I've heard from people who I could tell immediately they don't know anything about the subject, and they say, I know everything about this. Let's move on. Let's talk about something else. And I'm not saying necessarily that I'm wiser than they are there, but at least have the humility that's so required in any type of intelligent discourse that maybe you don't know everything and I don't know everything, and maybe we can communicate and I'll learn something from you and you'll learn something from me. One of the beautiful statements in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Ezu Chacham, who is the wise one? Halemed Mikol Adam, someone who learns from all people, Mikol Adam, which means no exception. Some other places actually adds, even from the fools. Afilu min hashetim. Why? Because a person who's really an inquisitive and curious person learns something from every experience. You can learn a lot from fools. You can learn what not to do, for example. You could also learn the wisdom that sometimes fools have despite themselves, and so on. But the interesting thing of this Mishnah really two things we derive from it is not just that the wise person learns, that everyone has something to learn, everyone has something to teach. Everyone has something to learn from someone else, and also everyone has something to teach. It means who's the wise one that learns from every person? That means every person has also something to teach us. Everyone. Which is also an element of dignity. You know, in the Torah there's a law, tzedakah, charity. Charity, even the pauper is obligated to give charity, commensurate to his means. But why? He has no money. He should be getting charity. Because in the Torah there's no such thing as a person that has nothing. There is no such thing. Everyone has something to give. And it's the dignity of the human spirit that even a person who has no financial means at all should also have the dignity. So you give a pruta, a penny, definitely give of time or wisdom. So this Mishnah tells us that there's no such thing as a person who has it all figured out. As the verse that's cited in that Mishnah, that I can learn something from everyone, and everyone has something to teach. And those that know how to communicate well recognize that all the time. And that's where you're able to break through in a conversation. I'll talk about how you deal with debates with people who are locked in their positions. But the most important thing is that you and I shouldn't be locked. The person who you're speaking to may be. But if you also are there, you're definitely not going to expect that they're going to suddenly open up and say, oh, by the way, you are absolutely 100% right. I was totally wrong. So as I said, if two people are obstinate in their positions, you rest assured you're not getting very far. So how do you get beyond that? That's why I go back to what I spoke about my own experience. The years that I spent listening to the Rebbe speak, what was the main secret to it all was suspending your own processing of ideas. We all have, as adults, ideas in our minds. And the smarter you are, the more those ideas are developed. And it's actually those places that you know most about is the places you're going to be the least open to hearing a new way of looking at it. Because you'll say, I already paid my dues. I already figured that out. Something new, I haven't heard about it, I'm ready to listen to. But it's interesting, this may sound completely counterintuitive, but when the Rebbe spoke about topics that I was familiar with, because I had learned about it before or heard about it before, those are the ones I remembered least. Because my own mind got in the way. Because you hear an idea and say, oh, I know that idea. I heard it yesterday. I read about it 5 years ago. And now, actually, you may even say, now I fit it into my framework. It maybe even answers a question I had. But this is all you thinking. It's not the speaker any longer. You're taking the ideas and fitting it into your framework. You'll say, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that, ultimately. But you're never going to really remember what the person said completely, because you'll only remember what you wanted to remember that fits into your perception. And this is even when you're right. Imagine what your perception is wrong, a misconception, and you're hearing something, you always fit it in. I mean, I can't tell you people I've had conversations with, very strong-headed, smart, and they usually win debates and they can basically out-argue anybody. And I'm having a discussion and something comes up and I see that there's a real blind spot here. So I'll say something and the person will say, I guess you didn't really hear what I said. Let me rephrase it. Whenever I hear that, I know there's narcissism here. Why? What do you mean? Why are you reframing it? Maybe I did hear what you had to say. Maybe I disagree with you. No, let me rephrase it. He rephrases it, and I continue to disagree. And I know exactly what's happening. And I say, you rephrased it. I want to tell you I still disagree. No, if you really heard me, you'd never disagree. What is happening here? He's telling me I wouldn't disagree. Forget about respect of my intelligence. Let's say I'm not that intelligent as you, but don't I have the right to figure it out a bit? No, okay, they rephrase it a third time. And it's no longer a conversation. I have to now agree with this person. And if I don't agree, they're going to find another way to tell it to me. Like a lawyer that's going to rephrase. Basically, they're making a case. And then I become like adamant intentionally. I like feigned indignation. And I say, I absolutely disagree with you. And I want you to get it into your head. I disagree with you. There's no way you can disagree with me. And then the best punchline is when the person tells you, now, if I remember this was, I was trying to remember the phraseology. It was so crazy, I can't even remember it. Yeah, the person tells me, if you made a different argument, you would have understood what he's telling me. If I say something differently, then I would agree with him. So I say, so now you're not only telling me that I agree with you, you're also telling me I should change my thought process to make sure it fits to your thought process. He's telling me that's because your question was phrased wrong. He's telling me that I shouldn't ask the question. You get the idea. I'm sure, I guarantee you probably had such experiences. Now, it's not to be critical of this person. A person like that is either deeply insecure or some other factors that don't let the person really think. And then I always conclude and I say, look, is it possible that you're wrong? And no smart person is going to say, of course it's possible, but I don't think so. That's what you usually hear. Most people don't say, impossible that I'm wrong. In fact, the matter is we all can be wrong, including me. And I've been wrong, and I've listened, and at times I realized that I was very adamant about an idea, and then, you missed something. It doesn't mean I was completely wrong, but at least one area, if I would listen a little better, I would have gotten something out of it, because a wise person learns from everyone. And you can always refine, and you could always crystallize, and sometimes you actually can have a completely different attitude to things if you really listen well. So you see, communication is much more complex than just speaking. It's really the ability to stretch an idea in a way that the people that you're speaking to and are listening to can identify with, because then they could also stretch. And we could always go beyond our initial perspectives. So let's talk about stereotypes directly, which I have been talking about, but I'm going to talk about it very specifically now. So this is the dilemma I've faced many, many times. And that is, you speak to an audience, you don't know who they are necessarily. In my particular case, especially after the book Toward a Meaningful Life was published, I was sent on a book tour, and these were not to synagogues or JCCs or Chabad houses or other Jewish environments. These were to Barnes & Noble. And Borders was then also a big chain. And bookstores. In bookstores, you're meeting people who may not even be coming to hear you speak, for that matter. They may be sitting there to have a coffee, and you just are the speaker. Or they came to buy an auto repair manual. Or you have actually people who sometimes not exactly captive audiences. So I began to struggle with the challenge. They may have all kinds of preconceived notions about anything, including the topics I'm going to speak about. How do I deal with that? And I can't sit down and interview everybody and say, tell me all your stereotypes and all your prejudices and biases and misconceptions or preconceptions. Obviously, that's not going to fly exactly. And besides the fact you just can't do that. So how do you get there? How do you deal with that? And everybody's stereotypes, including myself, including yourselves, including everyone. Stereotype per se is not necessarily a terrible thing. It's terrible when it spills over into discrimination and racism and condescension and judgment. But why do we all stereotype? Very simple reason. A lot of information is being streamed in our direction. How much information is coming our way on a daily basis? Tremendous amount of data. A lot of it we discard or we just ignore. But the data that does come our way, we want to fit into somewhere. It's like you come home from a shopping spree, you need to put things in your cupboard. So you put the spices here, the salt here, and other items in the refrigerator, you have your order. So the same thing, when ideas come our way, we want to organize them. We don't want to sit and have to analyze each one. So we say, oh, that seems to belong into this category. As soon as you're doing that, you are, in a sense, stereotyping. Someone sees me, Orthodox Jew, beard, yarmulke, and that's that. I'm not even saying that's incorrect, even though I don't like to look at myself that way. But that makes it easier for a person to process. They see someone else, Right away identify. Oh, this guy looks like a Muslim. This one looks like that. So we do this very innocuously. This is not a malicious form of racial segregation or anything like that. It begins with simply trying to make order in our lives. So we put things on shelves. The downside is that you can dismiss someone, or you can relegate them into something and completely not get the person. And who likes to be judged by their look? And this is a real story that happened. I was going to Cleveland, Ohio. It was when my book was published. I was on this tour. So in these book tours, what they do is they give you roll out the red carpet for a day, and then you turn it back into a pumpkin, basically at midnight, and nobody looks your way. They say, but they treat you like a celebrity. In the morning you go. They set up PR, print, radio, TV. So in the morning, the Cleveland morning show, I come into the studio. I'm going to have like this 7-minute interview about my book. I walk in. This is like the pre-interview, a few minutes before the time slot. And the person who was interviewing me was a young woman. And when she saw me, her face she was like shocked. And I didn't do anything. So I said, did anything happen? Like, what's disturbing you? She said, I never thought you would look like this. That's what she tells me. Because she had read my book, obviously. And she says, look like what? Something the matter, with my look? I mean, I knew already where she was, but she never thought I'd look like a bearded. So she said that. She says, I said, what'd you expect? She said, after reading your book, I expected to see a very slim, sexy-looking guy. So I said, I always thought myself that way. What can I say? No slim part, but so she says, because so I'm like shocked. Your book, you don't look like your book. Let's put it that way. Now, I said, you know that you're insulting me. I hope you realize that. She said, no, I don't really mean to say that. I just was really shocked to see you. Now, it's not the first time that happened to me, so I knew where she's coming from. So I said, so what do you think? You know anything about me? That you can just say that? My look, suddenly, maybe I'm more like the book than my look. How do you know what I am? Anyway, I said to her, why don't we talk about this on the show? Why don't you say that? So she did. She started off and she said, when the rabbi walked in, I had a shocked look on my face, and I asked him, and she basically repeated the question. She said a little more refined on TV. She said, wouldn't your message be more received by people if you looked more like us, meaning more secular? So I of course responded. I said, well, would you say the same thing to a Saudi Arabian prince that you were interviewing? Wouldn't they be more receptive if they looked like you? Or would you say this to someone with dreadlocks or some other cultural symbol? Why only me are you saying that to? And obviously I wasn't trying to insult her. I said, the whole point of my book and the whole point of real communication is that maybe we can get beyond stereotypes and start looking at each other's hearts and souls instead of our looks. I don't know if it was the Rebbe, someone that said that souls are not like clothing. Clothing have labels. Souls don't have labels. You can't define a soul by look or by shape or by color. A soul is an ethereal, sublime force that is invisible, actually. So if we all looked at each other and were able to actually see each other's souls, what would it look like? You think it would look like what you look like in the mirror? So anyway, it was a very good conversation. Actually, I loved the opportunity that she challenged it that way because I thought that was a tremendous point to be made. And this is the truth. The truth is we do not look at each other as souls. We do judge. We do stereotype. Again, there is a judgment and stereotype that's very innocuous and innocent and doesn't necessarily go on any negative thing because people do that. But it could easily spill over to true judgment. And I don't even like the word judge. Judgment at all is no good. But it could end up being dismissal of someone, criticizing them, or this whole clique thing that we have, this tribal divisiveness that comes that you're not like me. You're not my customs. And to the point of disrespect and to the point of lack of coexistence. And really the root of all issues in life, whether it's wars between countries or between communities or between shuls or between spouses, it really comes down to that. Two people with two different approaches and two different perspectives are unable to find a meeting ground. And each one thinks, I'm 100% right. What are they really doing? They are somewhat stereotyping. Something none of us would like. No one in this room, no one on earth would say, yes, judge me by what I look like. Everyone says I'm more complicated than what you see. But as soon as it comes to someone else, we easily can gravitate to that. Now, I'm not really want to talk about this on a global scale. I'm talking more on a personal scale. But stereotyping is a major thing, and I always feel it, because when you're in this... if I was only hanging around people that dress like me and my own community, yeah, even though there's also stereotyping, because that too everyone has their little standard. But especially when you're thrust into a more secular world, I deal with this all the time. And thank God, I have learned to diffuse it by preempting it. And that's where I'm leading to. How do you preempt stereotypes? Is by going back to what I said before. You speak about a language that people can have common denominator. If you try to teach people and say, I'm going to teach you my way, then some may be responsive and receptive, but most will not be. Why are you teaching me my way? I have a different way. Who says your way is better than my way? And the attitude to say, even someone who's smart knows how to cover their tracks, like make believe like I'm not really going to try to convince you, but I am trying to convince you, doesn't really work at the end of the day. It has to be a sincere sharing and a sincere care. Who says I have to convince you that I'm right? All I'm here to do is share with you a perspective, and you're an intelligent person. You'll take it and hopefully consider it and look at your perspectives that you may have had that were similar or different before I spoke, and do as you wish with it. Why is that not a very proper approach? Do you have to be wrong for me to be right? What happens if two people have two different perspectives? So, of course, this comes with a lot of self-confidence, and you feel secure. I don't need you to be wrong for me to be right. That we can have different perspectives, and we can share each other's perspectives, and maybe even change our minds, or maybe not. So how do we deal with diffusing stereotypes? Firstly, knowing that everyone has them. So in my case, wherever I go speak, even when they're speaking even to people who seem to look like me or I think have similar beliefs, I never assume anything. I never assume anything. And I even say it. You always go back to axioms that people may or may not agree about. I shared this yesterday, but I want to share it again because I think it's vital. I've been giving classes many years. I have an ongoing class now that's going since 1982. Unbroken chain for, how many years is that? 36 years. So it's in Manhattan. It used to be in Crown Heights, in Brooklyn, then it moved to Manhattan. People that are coming to this class were primarily in the beginning people from the arts and entertainment industry. And mostly Jewish, some not Jewish, very spiritual, but their spirituality, if you ask them, came from things like they would say Zen Buddhism or LSD. You've heard of that? Or other such psychedelic or other type of journeys. And here I am coming from my background. Just to the extent, I'll tell you an example of what happened one evening. This is going to be a little crazy, and I hope you don't think less of me or stereotype me based on what I'm going to be saying now. So I'm sitting, I remember this was in my home. We had on the table oranges and some apples and some coffee beans, some other stuff. And I was talking about a concept in Hasidic thought that everything in existence is constantly being perpetually energized by the divine force. So there's energy in everything. And I picked up an orange and I said, you see this orange? This orange has energy. And this energy is constantly being renewed. We may not see it, but we also don't see subatomic particles. And then I said, here's the apple and the coffee beans. And I said, each one has their own unique energy. And it's like pulsating within it. And that's the primary force. What we see is the shell. We see the surface. But behind the scenes lies entire forces of energy. I remember there was a woman, her name was Michelle Urey. She was sitting to my right. And she says to me, can you repeat that again? You're telling me you see energy in this orange and the coffee beans? So I said, I can't say I see it, but I not only believe it, I sense something. You know, I relate to it. Just like I relate to a life force inside of me. I can't see it, but I sense there's something. She said, how much acid have you dropped in your life? That's what she said to me. Kid you not. So I said, not 1 ounce, nothing, not a drop. No way, she said. There's no way you can speak about energy in vibrating and pulsating inside of oranges without having taken some LSD. There's no way. So I said, how do you know that? She says, because I took it. And I know what people that speak like you are people that I have experienced. We can only experience it that way. And she started sharing that she studied in Berkeley in the late 50s. That's when the first experiments, it was legal till 1966, LSD. And these experiments in the Berkeley and other universities, there were students that volunteered. At that time, they thought it was like a medical drug, and they'll see what's going to happen with it. They were trying to simulate different states of consciousness and madness or whatever. And she said, so I took a lot of it. And then at the table, everybody started sharing their acid trips. And this guy started talking about, this guy was from a band called Jay and the Americans from the 60s, and he tells me, he's telling us how he turned into an antelope of 3 billion years ago. And everyone started talking about their nightmare trips and so on. Now, I had heard about acid trips, and I read about it a lot, Timothy Leary's books. I was always intrigued, but I have no interest and never had an interest. But when I speak about it, people think, the guy, okay, you're one of us, So why am I saying it? Because she in her mind and the others could never imagine. I got it from a book called Tanya, called Shai Yichud V'Amunah, from the Alter Rebbe. That's completely, they would never have believed that such a thing, because by them it was completely, they were forward thinkers. Everybody else, religious people, are primitive thinkers. What do they know about energy or about enlightenment or about deeper forces at work? But this is a complete stereotype. Why? Because all those people sitting at the table had bar mitzvah lessons that were so hollow and empty that they never looked back again, like most Jews in America. And they talk about that, how it was irrelevant. Judaism talks about, there was literally a guy who told me that he did not believe that when he heard for the first time that I spoke about a soul, he said that he thought souls came from the Buddhists. Did not believe that Jews believe that there's a soul. And I said to him, do you know the Bible, it says God infused the soul? He says he never read it, he never heard it that way. Every morning we say, Shechzarta b'neshmasi, thank you for returning my soul, Neshama shenasata. Okay, he didn't ever prayed really, and he was never taught. But even if he was taught these words, it was taught with such emptiness, it was just a word. Like, go to a philosophy course, and some guys believe that there's some type of, soul. And it's interesting. So this is the classic stereotype that I see all the time. And especially people who have a certain enlightenment experience. Do you know that 60% of Buddhists in America are Jewish? Because Jews are seekers. They're seekers, and they seek transcendence, and they seek soulfulness. And they did not find it in their backyard, tragically. So they then wrote it off. Judaism? A Seder table? Yeah, I'll go if my grandmother insists, because I'll just make her happy. Let her die peacefully, knowing, or something like that. But for most of the people, it's nonsense or it's a joke. Now, even that stereotype has basis, because the Seders they sat at were like that. They schlepped them to synagogue on Yom Kippur against their will, who knows? So, so what I did was I tried an experiment. Instead of communicating to them with language, Jewish language, like Torah, God, and so on. Just give me a second if you don't mind. Because I'm recording this, because some people ask me to record, but I think the recording is just a moment. No, we're fine. Okay, so instead of using all this language, I came up with an experiment. I tried language that had no Jewish implications at all. Instead of God, I used words like the essence, or a higher reality, or particularly New Age people, I would say unconscious layers of undefined energy, or something like that. Instead of Torah, blueprint, or roadmap, instead of mitzvahs, connections, instead of Mashiach, Geula, redemption, I used destination. And here I was waxing eloquent about this journey into the essence of all of reality and the essence of ourselves, following a blueprint, a roadmap, and making these connections to the point where we come to total fusion, the destination, total fusion between soul, between matter and energy, between form and function, between soul and body, between the inner and the outer, in a seamless flow of harmonious synchronicity. Okay? You get the idea. Good. After a few weeks, and people were listening, they were like, wow, this is great stuff. I'm bringing my friends and all that. A few weeks got past, a guy, Kenny, I remember he comes over to me and says to me, tell me, you're talking about God? So I said, yes, but shh, don't spoil it for the others. And it worked perfectly. What happened? I completely took the conversation away from any loaded language. Words are loaded. Words can communicate, but they could also be loaded. What does the word God mean? We would pass out now a note to each one of you and say, write down in a short paragraph, what's God? Besides the prerequisites, supreme being, creator, first cause, whatever. What is God? Most of us have images of God that come from a nursery school. some guy with a white long beard sitting in heaven on a throne waiting to strike us with lightning when we misbehave. May not be that vivid image, or the joke that goes about the girl who's in a Sunday school Hebrew class, right? And the teacher says to them, they all come from secular homes, and says, okay, students, let's all find some symbol in your home that reminds us of God, of Judaism. Okay, one comes up with a menorah, a talit, a matzah, whatever. One girl sitting in the class, nothing. There's nothing in my house that reminds me of God. It's never mentioned. The teacher keeps badgering the students. Something. Okay, finally. The bathroom scale. The bathroom scale. What does the bathroom scale have to do with God? She says, because every time my mother steps on it, she says, oh my God. You know? Okay. So there you have a God of, that's a bathroom scale. And we all have our gods, so to speak. And we often don't even challenge it, because we usually pick it up either in school or at home or in the street. And sometimes they're very, very shallow and superficial definitions of God that, as I said, are childish. And sometimes maybe a little more sophisticated. Now, if you grew up in a home where God was a beautiful presence, and a Shabbat or a holiday brought out all that power, either to your grandfather or grandmother or parents, then obviously it's called great. So that's a good stereotype, and that works. But in most cases, it's not that way. It's not an accident that assimilation of the Jewish people in this country is almost such astronomical highs, because most people don't see Judaism in any way that's relevant. They didn't get the education. They're ignorant. It's not even malicious. And if you ask about religion and God, they have these stereotypes. And Woody Allen did a great job of solidifying them. So I'll just give you one or two Woody Allen ones that I deal with all the time. And these are in the culture. It's a joke and all that, but it's the way we think. The woman, the intelligent college graduate sitting at a Seder table with her grandfather, the devout grandfather, and he's saying every word in the Haggadah, with all his piety and all that. And then she's like, she's sitting there because of the family, but you could see she's not interested. And the grandfather starts yelling at her and says, maybe you should just be a good Yiddish Shemedla and just... She says, Grandfather, you're so brainwashed that, if you had to choose between God and the truth, which one would you choose? And without missing a beat, he says God. This is a Woody Allen punchline. In other words, truth and God have nothing to do with each other. This pious man, between God and the truth, I would choose God. Isn't God the truth? That's one. And they're on and on. Another one that always is a very destructive one as well. I'll take questions at the end if you don't mind. Yeah. Another one is the one where the guy comes to the rabbi, says, Rabbi, I hear that the Torah has the secrets to life and all the answers to the biggest questions. Yes. Would you teach it to me? Of course. How much will it cost? He says, nothing. God didn't charge Moses. Moses didn't charge the people. How could I charge you? Beautiful. He's doubly impressed. He's going to get the answer to all the questions, and it's free. Where do you get such things for free? Okay, they sit down. They open up a Torah. Of course, it's in Hebrew. And the rabbi says, Hebrew lessons will be $20,000. These little jokes and that elicit laughs in most places, except if you're speaking to a very ultra-Orthodox rabbinic community. Why because they ring true, because unfortunately that's what many people think. Religion is a business. And one way or another, they have some strings attached. And it's not just coming from God. At the end of the day, it's the $20,000. I can go on and on with such jokes. I have hundreds of them. Why? Because I use them all the time. That's how you diffuse stereotypes. You tell a joke about them, and then you discuss it. So this is what you deal with. And there's that invisible stereotype everybody has. Like as I said, for some people, it's completely non-malicious. It's just simply ignorance. They don't know. They never heard before an idea like that Judaism is relevant. Do you know statistics show that in the United States, 90 or plus % of Americans believe in some form of God or spirituality. And only 40% associate with a religion. Check it out. That's a big discrepancy. 40 to 90. Why? Because religion is seen exactly like this. Religion associates with these words. The knee-jerk reaction, and I've tested this many times. Religion is associated with ritual, guilt, punishment, judgment, dogma, community, conformity. I can go on. You get the idea. And it gets worse. Punitive, punishment, fear, anger, God's anger, This is, you ask many people, what's your connection to religion? They'll give you one of those words that I just said. Spirituality, free-spiritedness, open-mindedness, soaring, my soul is soaring, transcendence. And someone will say, give me an example of spirituality. They won't say a Seder table. They'll say music. Music. When I listen to music, I go to a rock concert. Now, I don't even blame them. Why? Because that's their experience. They're not making it up. It is indeed their experience. And as such, they respond that way. What do you do to diffuse it? So you take the bull by the horns. First of all, you make sure you don't get trapped and start talking about God and mitzvahs and Torah, assuming that everyone thinks your definition of God is their definition of God. And when you mention the Seder, and you start saying most people's Seder is I don't know if dogmatic is the right word, but definitely ritual. Ritual without the SPI in front of it. I can tell you thousands of people who have no clue that the rituals of Judaism have spiritual power in them. They think this is what you do, and that's it. Some will say, I've no problem with it. These are rituals I grew up with. I like it. It reminds me of my home, my parents, my grandparents. Many will say, what do I need it for? I have a lot of other things I can do. How many young people are going to say, yes, I'd love to go to shul to Shabbos instead of going to the beach or do something else? Why? Because they see nothing in the shul that touches their soul. This is classic stereotypes that actually have a damaging effect because then they become locked. And then I can tell you, this next step happens. I finally get through to someone who has those type of negative experiences. And they say, you know what, you're different. I like you, but not most of the Orthodox Jews. This guy that ripped me off, and my father hated because he stole money from the whole community. And they start going through all the nightmares of Orthodox. So I say, look, first of all, there are thieves everywhere. They're not, Secondly, how do you know that maybe I'm not the exception? What I'm sharing with you is what comes from the original Torah, the fact that many people are not representing it right. He says, yeah, but when many people don't represent it right, that's the community. And that's not easy to answer, to be honest, because it's a stereotype that has a basis. At the end of the day, you want to teach somebody, I say, we're not victims to our stereotypes. You have to find the quality people. I'm not telling you to buy into everyone that sells you something. I'm telling you to maybe re-look at it, revisit your Judaism. And those that do, because for whatever reason they allow themselves to be open or they hear something fresh, often have a very new experience, and it does change their lives. But we all have our blocks. We absolutely all have them. And the smarter you are, sometimes your resistance to something new is even greater because you have it figured out already. It's one thing you say, you know what, I'm not familiar with this subject, so at least I'm open. But if you're familiar with it, what do they say? Knowing half the story is worse than knowing none of the story. Because to have the story, you think you got the whole story, and you don't. So this issue, it lies at the heart of everything. It lies at the heart of communication. It lies at the heart of relationships. How many people have a misunderstanding what love is, what a healthy relationship is? Because they grew up in a home that was not a healthy relationship. People have told me, I can't tell you how countless people have said to me, I said, so you yell at your spouse, uncontrollably. Yeah, my father did that. I said, but you realize it's not a healthy thing to do. But my father did. So even if you realize it's unhealthy at some point, it's your knee-jerk way. It's your reflexive thing that you picked up from your childhood. These are not easy things to break. And then there's real stereotypes where you're really convinced that that's the way, it's the right way. Dysfunctionality suddenly becomes the norm. And I think I made the case to explain how deep stereotypes can affect us. So what's the counterforce? So as a communicator, the counterforce is not to take anything for granted, and you have to really nip it in the bud by speaking, like I did the experiment, a language that people can listen to, and not let their stereotypes and resistance suddenly pop in, because if they do, they're going to block you out. And then there's the key thing, above all, which is what Hasidic terminology, the word, the Hasidic term for it is called bittul. Some of you may be familiar with this word. I've used it many times in my classes, and I've spoken about it here as well. Bittul is a Hebrew word, spelled loosely B-I-T-T-U-L. Bittul. What it means, it's hard actually to translate into English because maybe the English language doesn't tolerate the concept. But bittul is a combination of modesty, humility. Maybe the best way to translate it is a suspension of self. It's what each one of us does when we're truly interested in growing. If you come with preconceived notions, and you come with everything that you have, your baggage. So your baggage is going to fill up the room, it's going to fill up your mind. How much room are you going to have for a new idea? So it's called like clearing your mind, clearing your mindset, and say, okay, let me hear a new way of looking at things. It's not always easy to do, mind you, because we have deep-rooted and embedded preconceived notions and attitudes. But it's the key to any type of growth. You see growth, and you'll right away see there was a form of bittul there. Growth means, how do you grow out of where you are? By recognizing there's something else that you may not have picked up, something else that you haven't seen. You want to climb a mountain and see broader horizons, expand your horizons, you have to climb. If you stand on the ground, you're going to see the horizon one way. You climb up 20 feet, it's a different story. You climb up 100 feet, it's yet another story. So this is a key to growth. Everything requires a form of bittul. And bittul literally means that when you hear something, you're ready to hear another way of looking at it. If that door is closed, it's almost impossible to grow. What do they say? In the healing world, they say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Or insanity is the sign, is what when someone tries to do the same thing and expects different results, that's called insanity. Or I like to put it this way. If you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. It's a mathematical certainty. You want change, you have to create change. You're not going to have a new change in your life, a new attitude, if there's no openness to a new attitude. Because then you say, and this goes across the board, people say, if you know how I've suffered in my life, you'd know why I'm so depressed. And you'll say, but maybe there's fresh air, maybe we can offer a new approach. No. If you really knew who I was, like basically you get trapped in your own, wallow in your own misery, you wallow in your own perspective. Now, obviously, this has to be done with care and concern. We're not here to assault someone's psyche and challenge everything. But you have to open up. There's no such thing as growth without fresh air. What happens when there's no fresh air? Infections fester and preconceived notions fester. So that's the challenge, how you elicit that bittul. Some of us have that openness. Some of us need, unfortunately, a kick in the pants to get such openness. That's why you'll see often that in life, when there's, God forbid, trauma or loss or death, suddenly there's a crack in the shell. There's a crack in the armor. And that, as Leonard Cohen puts it, that lets the light in. When things are going well and people are in their comfort zone, that's usually the most difficult time that you can actually reach people because they're comfortable. What do you want? Everything is going well. They are in their little bubble. And to change that bubble requires this bittul. The example I give is from the Chelam story. You know the Chelam story? I told it in one of my talks. Is anyone there? It's worth repeating it as well. So the Chelam farmer, Chelam was a small town in Poland. The farm on Chelam was even smaller, but it was his farm, it was his baby. He knew every grain of soil. He inherited from his parents, his grandparents. One day he gets a visitor, a cousin, a distant cousin from Texas, who's coming, who has a farm of thousands of acres. You can imagine thousands of acres compared to this little farm in Chelam. He gives his cousin a royal tour. They sit down for dinner. He says to his cousin, so what do you think about my farm here in Chelam? Cousin says, well, it's nice and cute. It's so tiny. So the Chelam farmer is taken aback. He's like insulted. How big is your farm back in Texas? So how do you explain to a little shtetl farmer who the entire city of Chelam is smaller than this guy's barn in Texas? So he's thinking of a point of reference. So he tells him, listen, it takes me all day to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the other end. And he thought with that he's going to give him like a good scope of sense. So the Chelam farmer suddenly, with compassion in his eyes, looks at his cousin and says, don't feel bad. I once had a tractor like that too, you know? Now the Chelam farmer cannot imagine a farm of that size. So when he heard that it takes all day, it reminded him of old shmata jalopy that took him all day to crank up to go from here to here. So that was his response. So if we were to pass out a questionnaire, and the question is, do you think are you narrow-minded, closed-minded, and prejudiced? Most people would not check that box. Why? Because part of subjectivity is thinking that you're objective. It makes you think you're objective. You know, like the guy that told me, I said to him, you have any blind spots? He says, yes, but I know what they are. There you go. So it's not a blind spot. So this Chelem farmer was not malicious. And he was just simply had no experience like that. Like I said before with the horizon, you're standing on the ground and someone asks you, what does the horizon look like? There's one answer. You go to the top of the mountain, completely different answer. Is one right and one wrong? No, it's your perspective. So the real answer is if someone asks you, are you subjective or objective? Your answer should be, I'm as objective as my perspectives and experiences allow me to be. All of us have our farm. All of us. And that farm is based on what we grew up with, parental attitudes, social attitudes, communal attitudes, the media, even now, perceptions. We talked about Trump the other day. You remember, if you were all here, you saw what was going on. No one changed their mind over a year. Trump. Forget about it. Obama. Hillary. Did any one of us even meet any of them? What do we know? I don't even know people I meet at lunch every day. All I know is that they like to eat. You know? As I do. Yeah. But what do we know about people? And I'm not here, it's not a defense, and it's not a critique, and it's not a pro or anti. It's a little humility before you make conclusions about someone. You got to know something. We all have our farms. And those farms affect our way of thinking. I love being in this program. I'll tell you why. I've been in many programs. But I like the diversity of people, and I like that people are very nice and not condescending and obnoxious. Now, if some of you are, please let me know. You know, I haven't seen it yet. Why? Because it's an openness. People sit, you can have a conversation. And I learn tremendous things from people, as I hope they learn from me. That's an environment you want to be around. Sometimes you go to places, everyone has it all figured out. I know it all. And that's usually signs, as I said, not necessarily of healthy, secure minds. So, no, it's all right, it's all right. It's all right. Lunch is, where are we? Yeah, 1 o'clock. You think you'll miss anything? Okay. No, I'm winding up. What time is it now? It's almost 1?
2 after.
2 after 1. Ooh. Okay. So I will conclude in the following note. My whole point of this conversation is not just to be entertaining and share some thoughts, but the truth is we all can tremendously grow from each other and from other people we know, and even people who may not know much compared to what you know. And the way to open others is by being open yourself. Now, obviously, I have values, I have ideas, I have ideologies that I believe in and have been proven to be correct in my life. But I always know that other people have different experiences. I'll share my experience. I'm not going to be shy about it. But there are people who have different experiences. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, never judge another person because you don't know what they went through. I've seen this in my life so many times. I'll just share one, talk about stereotypes. I was sitting and giving a class, and I was talking about unconditional love. You know, love that has no conditions, that you just give love even if there's no strings attached. No, you gain nothing. And there was a guy sitting not far from me to the right. And as I was continuing and talking about it, you could hear him starting to mutter, to whisper. And it gets louder and louder. And to the point that he says, yeah, unconditional love. The only love that you get that's unconditional is never from humans. You said it with such like anger and venom almost. And he said, only from dogs. Only from dogs. And he started speaking louder and louder. And he was just, and, you know, at some point I stopped speaking because he was speaking. Some people said, can you shut up? We came to hear the rabbi, and I came to hear you frothing at your mouth. And he started like, you know, dismissing him. Anyway, I looked to him, and everyone was looking what I would do, because he was clearly troubled by something. And it would be very easy to make a good joke on his behalf. And everyone would have laughed, and it would have been entertaining. So I said to him, I knew who he was, I said to him, you know, tonight we're speaking about human love. We'll talk about canine love at another class. And he said, okay, good, I got it. And he quieted down, and he just was quiet the rest of the class. Now, it wasn't just I was being sensitive. I'll tell you in a minute something. Let me tell you what happened after that. The class ended. I went home. Before I went home, a woman who was in the class gave me a little note. I didn't read it till I got home, and she writes the following. And I say this simply, has nothing to do with me, it's just what happened here. She says, I've been to your class now for 3.5 years or something like that. I've learned many things, but tonight I learned the menschlichkeit, the way you treated him with respect, was completely more than I've ever learned before. And I really wanted to just share that. Now, it wasn't just being sensitive. As I said, first of all, if he's troubled, then obviously who are we to judge him? But I remember in my early years, I was still a student and I was teaching some classes. And there was a guy who came to me twice my age. I was maybe 24, he was probably 50. And he comes to me, wanted to see me privately. And it wasn't like I was seeing people then. I wasn't counseling anyone. I was a kid, relatively speaking. But I was giving classes, and he felt he could trust me. And he told me the following. Remember, he said to me, I want to tell you that I learned love in my life from a dog. And I was sitting there, and I didn't react because I wasn't going to in any way. But I thought to myself, either something's the matter with him or something's the matter with me. What's he talking about? And I didn't even, at that point, I didn't even know what it meant to be a dysfunctional home. No home was perfect, but my home, I had love in my home. And then he explains. He says, my father was an alcoholic. He'd come home in these fits of rage, and he would lunge at my mother with a bat, and I got in the way. He was the oldest, and I didn't I protected my mother, and he would hit me instead. And sometimes my body would be covered black and blue marks from head to toe. And I couldn't even sleep because I was so in agony. I would go out to the garden. We lived in the south, and there was a kennel, and the dog we had, would soothe me all night. That's where I learned love, not from my father, from my dog. But I remember this is the first time I ever heard something like this, and I said to myself, I remember afterwards I went to read up on it, and I never had such an experience. I never heard something like this before. I didn't hear about a father that can hurt a child like that. I was naive, to be very honest. I've since learned, unfortunately, that we have such tragedies. But I never forgot my complete shock, because what he said was, I could have dismissed that the guy is delusional or something's the matter with him. Obviously, I didn't do that. Why would I feel that way? But I came to realize we know nothing about what people go through. Absolutely nothing. Who knows what kind of childhoods we've had? Now, I would like to believe everyone had here the most idyllic and beautiful childhood, and it was all love, love, love. But I've learned, unfortunately, it's not the case in all instances. And you never know what people went through. And they may be angry, and they may say things that are extremely obnoxious, but who knows where it's coming from. Again, this doesn't justify an adult is an adult, and you got to behave a certain way. But from my point of view, when people speak a certain way, I always in my mind say, what did this person go through? And again, not in a condescending way, like what's the matter with him, and in a pathetic fashion, but really understanding that we don't know the journey that souls go through on all levels. I told an extreme story. There are stories that are a lot less subtle than that, more subtle than that. It's just an attitude that if you have that attitude, and you're open to hear people and never judge them, they will open to speak to you, and it always works that way. If you're not, why would someone trust you? You're not able to get beyond your comfort zone. Why would they get out of theirs? And I think we have a serious responsibility, because you never know. It could be someone that's your neighbor. It could be someone sitting here now at lunch, and they're not ready to speak. And I'm not saying everything has to turn into a therapy session, but the more of us that have that type of empathy and recognize that there's the majesty, dignity of a soul's journey, the more help we can be to people. And it really comes down to this: are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? I grew up in a home and an environment, the Rebbe. I can't tell you, the empathy. It was in my blood 24/7. And anyone that is familiar with this knows exactly what I'm saying. Right, Faye? You grow up, you recognize the respect of a soul. I saw people go by the Rebbe gave dollars, that you would dismiss in a second and say, what are they doing here? What are they making the man crazy? And then the sensitivity, because it's a soul. God sent his soul to this earth. There's a rabbi I know in England, a chassid, who unfortunately had rage and would hit his children sometimes. And he asked the Rebbe, what can he do? He can't control himself. And the Rebbe said, next time you look at your child, think it's not your child, it's God's child. And God is standing there and saying, how are you treating my child? That is the attitude. This is not, even parents don't own their children, and we definitely don't own each other. We are all souls sent here to this world by God, and we have the respect that has to be absolute. Just like you love God, you love the souls God has sent to this world. And stereotyping and prejudicing and biases is really an insult to God. It's an insult to the souls that he put in this world. Now again, this doesn't mean we accept everything everyone does and we forgive. No, there's a discipline, there are rules, there's a behavior, there are standards. But it's the attitude how. We're not talking about the what. We obviously all have standards. But the what, it always has to come from a loving place and never from, oh, you're making me uncomfortable or doesn't fit my comfort zone. That's not the reason we challenge someone's positions. We challenge them because we really think that there's a better way. And we try to be open and talk about it in that fashion. Anyway, this is a big topic, obviously. It gets bigger and bigger. And lunch is beckoning. I know, there's only three more lunches. Right? Countdown. So, but it's been an honor to share a few words. I'll be happy to take a few questions. Those are the one?
Only one lunch.
Only one lunch, okay. I'll continue. I'll be happy to take some questions, but above all, I want to say that I think if we all develop and a little more sensitivity in our own, we all can really change the world for the better. So thank you so much. Now we'll take some questions. I see some hands up. Let's go for it. Yes. And you say what you said, and you do what you did, you'll have what you had. I'll take yours, then I'll take you. Go ahead.
I missed the word you used. It sounds like bittul.
B-I-T-T-U-L. Yes, bittul. T-T-U-L.
And how would you define it?
Recognizing and suspending your perspective and recognition that there may be another greater perspective. That's how I would define it. Like the Chelem farmer. To realize that we all have our little farms, but there may be bigger farms.
How do you spell it?
B bet yud tet vav lamed. It's a very popular, powerful theme in Hasidic thought. Okay? You want to follow?
I still don't know how to use it in a sentence. Like humble. Is it humility?
It's a combination of humility, modesty, and suspension of what. It's like, for example, you hear an idea that goes against the grain of your ideas. Bittul would be saying, you know what, let me give the benefit of the doubt, let me hear more, instead of closing yourself off from hearing a broader perspective.
Is it a noun? How is it an adjective?
It's a noun, but it could also be a verb.
Yeah.
It's a noun. It's a state. It's when you're sitting before your teacher,
It's a process.
or before your master, or sitting before a book. You don't read into the book what you want to read into it. You let it read to you and tell you the message. So it's the opposite of an arrogant approach. You know, it's like reading something and saying, okay, let me learn what this page had to tell me. Some people can't listen. It's a form of listening also as well. Listening, absorbing. By the way, just for the record, I'll say this. Online, on our website, meaningfullife.com, I have a lot on this topic. So I invite you all to go there. There's a lot of great material. Meaningfullife.com. And if you email me, I'll be happy to direct you to those places. You know what? If you do give me your emails before we finish Passover, I'll actually send you some links on these topics that I've spoken about. I'll also send you links to the recordings. They've all been recorded, the weekday ones. So please write down your email address, give it to me by lunch or tomorrow, anytime, before the holiday or after the holiday.
And I can tell you that since I'm from Texas, we have a ranch in Texas called the King Ranch. It's like half the state of Texas.
There we go. Then I'm going to use that.
They tell the story about the farmer who said to the man from the King Ranch, "How big is your farm?" And he says, "Well, I have a big
Are you back in the hotel?
and it could take me a week to get there. I don't have a car, I'm coming." And the farmer said, "Yeah, I had a truck like that once."
That's a story. That's a story I told. Okay, great. So I'll use that one. That's good. Excellent. Yes.
On this topic of stereotypes, there's also the opposite. There are times I wear my beard a little more bushy than it is now. And I'll walk past people and they'll say hello respectfully.
Right. Oh, yeah, there's no question there's positive stereotypes. I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, I was talking about the ones that block us from growing. So I hope I did some justice to this.
You did?
And enjoy your lunch, and we'll have some more talks, I think. I don't know when, but look at the program.
No, I'm not. So what do you say when they say thank you or hello?
I say, when they say
say to me, I say, thank you for giving me smicha.
Yeah.
Let me get smicha.